In this video, Professor Richard Wolff, by the way, they keep calling him doctor. They called him doctor like 3 times. You know, he doesn't do coronary bypass surgery. He's a professor. He's not a doctor. Everyone wants to call him doctor, but I guess it's a sign of respect. But he explains how American corporations went to China to maximize profits, and nobody held a gun to their head.
And you get the results that the Rand Corporation, like many other investigations, have shown. That the response, and this is really important, folks, that the response of the capitalist class, and who do I mean by that? I mean the people who are employers, the people who are in the position of hiring other human beings. The United States Census tells us that 3% of the American people are employers. The other 97% are not. And what that means, whatever else you think, it puts that 3% in a position to make powerful decisions that the other 97% of us have to adjust to, have to live with, and basically have to accept, unless we make a revolution, which, as you both noticed, we have not had. So here is what that 3% did, and then I'll stop. The 3%, starting particularly in the 1970s, realized that the Europeans and the Japanese had recovered from the war, as everyone should have expected them to do. They were still the Germans and the Japanese, hardworking, highly skilled, engineer, modern country, all of that. And they understood that their place in the sun could only be achieved if they could outdo the absolutely dominant economy in the world, namely the United States. So they set their goals on producing goods and services that were either better than or cheaper than, or hopefully both, what was done in the United States that made the United States great, which is why Americans discovered in the 1970s and 80s the Volkswagen and the Toyota and the Nissan and the fill in the blank. They did it. They did what they set out to do. They produced better cars so that even Americans bought them ahead of the Ford, the Chevy, the Chrysler, and so on. And in that moment, the discovery of the American capitalist class was that if they didn't do something dramatic, they would be sliding downward as their former adversaries, the Europeans and the Japanese, made their move. And that move was more and more successful with each passing year. So here's what they did. Number one, they made the decision to move the manufacturing base of the United States out of the United States. The working class in the United States had been so successful in pushing up wages over the previous century, a century in which profits rose faster than wages, but they rose fast enough right up until the 70s that the employer could share with the workers a modest increase every year that the union would negotiate. And when an employer didn't do it, the unions had the muscle to strike and to get it. And so wages were much higher. But in the 1970s, the invention of the jet engine and the invention of the internet made it possible to supervise, organize, monitor a manufacturing factory in China pretty much as easily as you used to do it across the street in New Jersey or St. Louis or Chicago or where you were. So they left. The second thing they did was to take advantage of their history and to automate, to really go about systematically focusing on replacing these high cost workers, which they kept seeing as their great problem. Wages were lower in Japan. Wages were lower in Europe, significantly so. And so they realized, how do we do? Well, we replace workers with machines. And the third action, bring cheap workers here when it wasn't convenient to move production there where the cheap workers live. Those three things, export of jobs, automation, and immigration of working class people, that is mostly people in their working ages, 20 to 50, who would come here with or without family, no one really cared, but would work for a penny on the dollar compared to what Americans were used to. And I have to tell you, that worked. That strategic move of the business class, those 3% who run the businesses, worked. They all did it. By the way, at the beginning, many of them were hesitant. They didn't want to go to China. China is, doesn't speak English, and China's far away, and China's run by a communist party, very scary, don't want to do it. But they had to, because the first ones who did it made such profits that those who were not willing to go had to overcome their cautionary anxieties and go. But I want to stress here, because Americans are being fed real nonsense about all of this. No one held a gun to their head. The Chinese never had the authority or the power to make that happen. They might have wished it, they might have wanted it, but they never had it. This is a decision made by Americans. And by the way, their counterparts against whom they were competing in Japan and Europe followed suit, also went to China, and exactly for the same reasons, which is one of the reasons Europe is in the trouble it is in now, Japan having difficulties that it is in now. The world has changed. The People's Republic of China is an entity in the world economy, the likes of which we have not seen for a century. I need to explain to people so often, Russia, the Soviet Union, may, and I underscore may have been an adversary militarily, may have been an adversary ideologically, but economically, never. It was much too poor. It could never hold a candle to the American economy. That was its Achilles heel. And then when it tried to match the arms race with the US, when it tried to control another country, Afghanistan, it discovered that it was simply too poor to pull that off. And having waited too late, it dissolved. It couldn't survive. No one has missed that lesson, least of all the People's Republic of China. So they've been super careful. If you watch them now, they're still, when they don't actually need to anymore, be super careful. They don't impose tariffs on us until and after we do that to them. That's been their kind of behavior all the way through. But we Americans have to understand we are not in position to win. We're not even in a position to fight another Cold War. China isn't a Cold War the way the Soviet Union was. The conditions are completely different. And if the United States pursues it, I, as a betting person, would bet we will lose. Not out of it. Not that we aren't strong. We are. Not that we aren't rich. We are. But the world isn't a place where statements like we're rich and we're strong carry the day. That is over. Well, and I think that is a necessary way to frame or to contextualize all of the other important issues.
Well, Dr. Wolff, thank you so much for laying that out. That is really fascinating. And I guess when we're talking about the RAND report, so they were at this sort of pivot point.